Hello and welcome back to awtoolbox.com. My name is Glenn Keller, and in this video we are diving into opening and interacting with structures inside of the Active Workspace Client. Now, we are working in Teamcenter 2412 in this video, and we have an assembly that was provided by Sherpa Designs. They are a provider for NX training, CAD CAM solutions. I highly recommend going and taking a look if that is your requirement. However, in this one, they have provided an assembly for us to work through, and if you are taking the course on one of our machines, this will be preloaded in the machine. You can just do a search like I did. If you are not working in one of our machines, then you can simply just find a component that has some data underneath of it that is visualization data. You may want to ask your SME, your subject matter expert, for the right assembly to use as you're investigating it. In our case, though, we do have an assembly in here, and it is, if I filter on this, I'm just going to do a filter for the word cut. And then you can see there's an assembly, X to Y cutting head. So this assembly, what I'm going to be doing is just kind of taking a look at all the different components, opening it up, looking at some of the different things that we can do against this assembly. And then in future videos, we'll dive deeper. We'll get into all the nuances of interacting with assemblies within the scope of just kind of usability. So first of all, this assembly is actually owned by somebody that I am not. So I don't own this assembly. I may not be able to do certain things with it. I'm going to go ahead and look across the top up here, and you'll notice that there isn't a way to view the assembly. If you click through all these, it's just going to be references or information about the selected component. However, if you open the component, so just use the open key, or you can use the open in new tab or window up here. But if we just go ahead and click open, this assembly will open up in this version of the software right off the get-go. So we'll see the entire tree load in here, and you can see information about what you have selected on the right-hand side. And then up across the top, you'll see some additional settings that are relative to the assembly. So things like what is your revision rule, which is kind of like what revision out of the set of revisions available for a single component will be displayed. Effectivity, like unit effectivity or date effectivity, any variants that are applied, as well as any rules that you have for expansion. So how far down do you want this to go? And then you can always reset your view. So if you click reset, you can say reset, and it will actually store off where you are, and you can see the reset basically collapses it down to one level. So this is a really good way to look at the assemblies if you're in older versions just trying to get an update. This would have been comparable to the content tab in previous versions of Active Workspace. Now, Siemens has put a lot of effort into giving us this tree view that we can then expand using the little arrows and select different components for. So this is great. And then we have a lot of different columns that are preloaded for us. Things like our find number, our quantity, unit of measures, effectivities, last modified users, variants. The sky's kind of the limit here. So all of your BOM line properties are here. And don't forget about hitting the little arrange option in the table if you want more than what's supplied out of the box. So in here, I see all of my elements, and I can select each one. So let's say I want to select this bearing. I can see that the quantity is 4. If I go into where used, I can see information about where this is used inside of the assembly. So it is used in the structure, and it is a part of the channel assembly, which is a part of the overall cutting head assembly. I can see references where it could be linked in the system down below. And then if I go to attachments, I can see that it does have some geometry associated to it. So the UG master dataset is going to be your typical NX part file. So it's going to have all your NX files inside of it as named references. I can select this and I could view the named references. So I could come in here and say manage, or let's say view. And then here is dataset option, view dataset versions. And if I select this, I only have the one version of this. And if I kind of move this out a little bit, you can see that that's pretty much it. So this is the named reference, the information about it, and then the dataset version. I could download the version of that file as well to get some information off of it. So I could keep, it's a QAF file that's getting downloaded. There is probably more associated, so just be aware that this may not download all of the associated content. If you come in, depending on your permissions in here and look through the menu, you can see the download option, you can see the viewer options menu where you could control 3D characteristics. Sometimes you could get like the named references view of it if you opened it up. But this is relative to your CAD data. The direct model data set next to it is your visualization data. So think of this as kind of a compressed version of the CAD geometry. It's a way that Active Workspace can render out that 3D data right here in the client without the need to launch the NX or CATIA or whatever kind of data that you're interacting with. Now, if you are standing on a component in the assembly and ever want to take a look at the 3D geometry and it has a direct model dataset associated to it, then you should be able to come into this Details tab and select 3D. When you select 3D in this case, it will actually spin up a process that allows you to visualize that component. So it's using that relationship to that JT and it's actually pulling it in and showing the full assembly in here. So you can see it's loading it up, and once it gets loaded, you can see how I can interact with that data. Now it's still loading the data, and the one specific component that I have selected in here, you can see that it's ×4, and then those 4 components are actually what's going to get selected. Everything else is going to gray out if I don't have it selected. If I hover over different components, then they turn red, as we just saw. So you can interact with other ones, but then I can select a different component in that assembly, and you'll see that one highlights instead of the other. So the 3D component, viewing those direct models against each one of the components, is really nice here in the assembly view. There is a lot of other things that you can do in here, and we'll get into visualization a little deeper in the next video. So if we're looking at the assembly view, we know we can collapse and expand it, but there's a lot of other options that exist up here in this top corner. So we've got configure the view that we're looking at, configuration settings. We can split the assembly. We can create new child objects or new components. And then there's also a manage bars where you can actually show context information. Across the top of the actual expanded assembly, you can do a lot of things as well. So you can add new components, such as coming in and adding a child, which would be a child to the selected component, a sibling, which would show up at the same level as the selected component. You can also add substitutes and alternates for when you're maybe out of stock, you can't reach the vendor or the supplier. You can also add effectivities. So in here, you can also edit the structure. So you'll have the ability, if you have write access to the assembly, to remove, replace components, insert components in different levels, move them around, split the quantity out. The sky's kind of the limit there. You can also do a find, and if you do a find in here, and we do a find for vibration and hit enter, you'll see that I don't get any search results for vibration right off the get-go. But if I put a star in here around the 2 and hit search, you'll see that I actually do get a couple of related components. So just check those search settings to see how those wildcards play in. And you can see down at the bottom here, I get the result. So if I hit move down, it'll move down and jump to the next component that matches it in the assembly, and it'll auto expand as needed. I could also perform an advanced search for components to just quickly find what I'm looking for, and then those components obviously highlight, so if you're looking at the 3D tab, they would show up. Now I can say find within. Up at the top here, you can see that it's finding within just that assembly, so it's not searching the whole database, it's just in the scope of this assembly. If I come over to the right a little bit more, I can control the expansion, so I can pack all lines that are allowed to be packed. So anything that has the same find number, revision, etc. I can expand and unpack. So you can see how all 4 of those just kind of split out there for a second. And then now that all 4 are split out, I could come back in and say unpack all. So if I do this, there'll be a lot of components in here that'll expand out. It may take a few seconds to do that. You can see that now I get quantity 1 across all of these occurrences. And then I could easily choose pack all, which will pack all of those inside of the display. So just kind of coming across, we can also compare assemblies. So I can compare structures. I do need to go through the motions of getting one that I have access to, making modifications to it, and that way we have an assembly that is a little different. So bear with us on this. We'll come back to comparing. We can duplicate an assembly, which is something that we're going to do in the next video, where we can come in and basically hit duplicate and then change attributes and IDs and things associated to it, mark it all up, and then click duplicate to actually execute that process. So if you don't want to do it, just take cancel, discard, and it will go back to the page that you were on, to the location. So you still have your selection mode where you can select all the components with a checkbox or just some of them. And then you also have edit mode, which is very nice. I can click edit here against this table and then slide this over to the right, and anything I have permissions to, I would be able to edit in this display. You could even mark it up and redline it and greenline it depending on your changes, and then fully commit those changes after you have it all marked up. In this case, I'm going to cancel my edits because we still need to go through and get an assembly we can work with. But the final component up here is the Excel round trip. So I can actually export to Excel or import changes from Excel and work primarily in Excel and just kind of have it come in and update if I needed to. I do need full permissions to be able to do this, but we may take a look at this as we go forward. So if I look at the configuration option up here, the configuration option is going to put a panel on the left-hand side over here. All I did was click this configure up at the top here. And you'll see that you can set revision rules in the system. You can set effectivities, and then you can see what the end item for those effectivities are, variant options, as well as any default expansion rules that you may want to set. If I go to configuration settings, notice I could show variant options, show suppressed options that are inside of my display. And then I could easily just split the context of this assembly as well up here so that it essentially opens up the cutting head on one side and the other, so I could see 2 assemblies simultaneously. So this allows me to work with 2 different assemblies and see all of those components. If I was working with something like an M-bomb and E-bomb, I could open them up side by side and compare and contrast the 2. Though things like SLM or Easy Plan may give you a little bit better of an interaction with those. I'm going to hit exit split across the top, and I'm back to my primary assembly here. And basically that is an overview of assemblies in a nutshell. The top level, how do you search them? What do all the buttons do? As we break into this in the next videos, we are going to start actually duplicating the assembly and then interacting with it, and eventually we'll get to a point where we're playing around with the 3D geometry, the visualization, making markups in preparation for a change. So we hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you in the next one.